South Africans are voting in one of the most crucial municipal elections since the dawn of democracy in 1994. More than 26 million citizens are expected to cast their ballots across the country. Support for the ruling ANC party could take a hit in the largest cities following chaotic and sometimes violent corruption and unemployment protests in recent months. Well, let's cross to Johannesburg, where we can speak to Tsidi Bishop, who's following the elections. Tsidi, good to speak to you. Why are the elections seen as the most important?
They are the most important because if you look at the entire Africa, liberation movements stay for decades. They are never out-seated. They stay for decades. Most of them dwell on corruption. Most of them slide to corruption. Most of them abuse their power. And this is one time where South Africans feel that we cannot have a situation that we see in other African countries where a majority party sometimes overrule the voices of the people. It is seen as if the ANC, which is the ruling party, has moved away from the aspirations of the people. It is now focusing on itself. It is focusing on its self-interest and keeping itself in power, and also sometimes ignoring the voices of the people. It is also important because it is seen as a referendum for the ANC leader, Jacob Zuma, because he had managed to stay and survive an impeachment vote in April. This was the time where South Africans thought there will be a change, because this is a president that they see as highly unpopular because of numerous corruption and scandals that have followed him around. And they realized that the ANC alone is unable to unseat President Jacob Zuma. They feel that only through the ballot box will either the ANC or Jacob Zuma be reminded that they are there to represent the people, not to represent their own interests.
Tsidi, we're seeing live pictures of some of the voters turning out at polling booths, and we know that there have been 26 million registered voters. What sort of preparations is South Africa putting in place in order to try and make sure that these elections are carried off in a calm and non-violent manner?
There's been a lot of preparations, especially, as you've mentioned, there's been violence before in some areas, especially we saw in the area of Pretoria just a month ago. 2,000 soldiers have been put across the country to areas that are seen to be hotspots, and at least 7,000 police have also been dispatched in those areas. There are numbers of ballot boxes that have been put out for people to vote. We're expecting 26 million people to go and vote. This is 3 million voters more than the last local election, last local government election. So this is going to be a headache to manage. And also the reason that we are seeing so many police on the ground is because there's fear that the people who may not want to vote, they're disillusioned, who feel that perhaps voting has not done them anything. They may try and prevent other people from going to vote. We also are seeing so much police being put on the ground because of the fear that because the ANC is finding itself, for instance, for the first time in a precarious situation. There may be some kind of ballot rigging. We may see a delay in ballot boxes being delivered in time in some areas. We may even see some ballot boxes not reaching some areas. So all these foundations have been laid to make sure that the elections are free and fair. And this is hard to manage because if you look at the numbers of polling stations, they're enormous. There are 22,000 polling stations around the countries. These are the polling stations that have been prepared and laid on the ground to make sure that they accommodate the 26 million people that have gone to register. We're also looking at a heavy number of parties that are going to vote, much more than we've seen before. For instance, in the Western Cape, there are 37 parties that are contesting the elections in the Western Cape. This is very huge. For the first time, they are going to be using an A3 paper to accommodate all the parties that will be contesting the elections in the Western Cape alone. And there is a huge fight in other huge metros where there are about 3 million people who are living in that area alone. So it is going to be chaotic, and the IEC is trying very much to make sure that it is smooth smooth, it is fair, it is controlled, and the results are free and fair.
OK, Tsidi Bishop live in Johannesburg. Thank you.